Hi, you're listening to Boggy Talk, Faith Conversations in the Mud, a resource of Church on Bayshore. Boggy Talk is recorded on Boggy Bayou in Niceville, Florida, and is hosted by Justin Wyatt and James Ross, pastors at Church on Bayshore. We typically want every matter of faith and life to have crystal clear answers, but it isn't always that easy. This podcast digs in to help Christians think with a kingdom mentality about topics that sometimes get muddy and bog us down. So let's dive in.
Hey, and welcome to Boggy Talk. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining us. And joining me here is James Ross, lead pastor here at Church on Bayshore. You doing all right, buddy?
Man, I am great. I feel refreshed. It's fall.
It's fall, and it actually
No, it's fall.
It's fall until December 21st. It is officially fall, and it actually feels a little bit like fall.
Okay,
so that's nice. We finally get a little taste of that. It's a great 2 weeks in Florida.
By taste, do you mean pumpkin spice?
No,
are you a pumpkin spice guy?
I'm anti-pumpkin spice.
Are you really?
I do not like that. I feel like I know that's just. Ugh.
Heck no, HMOs. Not HMO. What are they called? GMO.
Yeah,
HMOs too, though. I don't like HMOs either.
It's like, isn't that healthcare?
You need an HMO from the GMOs.
I love coffee. I roast my own coffee beans, and I just like coffee with
bougie.
A little. It's actually cheaper. So
I was going to say that's
because I'm so cheap. But
Justin is just so frugal. You're like $5. This tastes
terrible. No way I'm spending that. Yeah, so it is. It actually is like nice to have hot coffee in the mornings.
Yeah,
with cool weather. It's so good. And hey, some fun things been happening here at church. We had D-Now weekend with our students, which was great. Awesome. Yeah, and then this past Sunday we celebrated Orphan Sunday.
Yeah, it was great.
Powerful. And what I love about Orphan Sunday is that it wasn't just us. It wasn't like this idea that we came up with, but it's thousands of churches across the world. It actually began in which country though? I think
just make one up.
That's terrible because it is such a pet peeve of mine when things come from the continent of Africa and people are just like over there in Africa, and I'm like, there's a country. I'm pretty sure it's Zambia though.
It doesn't rain in Africa, right?
That's right?
Or will it rain? What's the song? You know what I'm talking about? Come on, you're the song.
Rain down in
Africa. Oh yeah, send it.
There you go.
Yeah. So they don't necessarily comment on whether there is rain or not.
That's
they just ask for it. Okay.
So we back to today. It's just great. And so this coming week we're picking back up with He is Greater Than Tradition on Sunday mornings, and really we're in this series talking about some of those things as we're talking about traditions and maybe stereotypes of traditions of Christians, and we've talked over the past few weeks in Boggy Talk about some of those, and today we're picking up with this problems with Christians, that Christians can be perceived and seen as being sheltered.
Yeah, or too sheltered. Is the better way.
Yes, because there's some good in shelter. It feels
like we're changing gears a little bit here, right? Or maybe take a little left turn.
We like to keep you on your toes. Like, what are they going to talk about? Because we did not tease what we're talking about today. So
Justin, what do you mean sheltered?
I mean, so there's the stereotype of sheltered, that we actually, people see our family and they see what we drive, that we drive a 12-passenger van. And so they assume that Christy's going to wear her hair in a bun and no makeup, and that all of our children are homeschooled, and if you do that, we're going to talk about some of that. But that there's just a stereotype that goes along that. And then that Christians are then out of touch with what's going on in reality. We are not just out of touch, but a bit prudish about being out of touch. That being out of touch is like an extra fruit of the spirit or something, like love, joy, peace, patience, and out of touch with the culture because we are way better than that. Yeah. That's kind of what I'm talking about.
I remember hearing a pastor say one time that if Jesus was going to come back and reinstitute the 1950s, most churches would be ready for it.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, based on if you walk into the sanctuary,
and it's still the same. Even that, for me, it's like when you go in an older church like that and it still looks like that, it's not just what it looks like, but there is a distinct smell too, that it's like, this just smells old. Yeah. I don't know what that is. It's not.
Ours just smells like it's on the bayou.
On the bayou. You walk in, you're like, wow, it smells like fish.
I feel like I'm in water in our sanctuary, and it's like our properties guys like I'm doing everything I can,
Yes.
but they literally built this campus on water.
I know when we show up on Sunday mornings, like first one's here and the worship team is going through stuff. Like there's times it's like we're sweating, and and then it finally.
Well, and I require you to bring it to a certain level of humility.
That's right.
Humidity before I walk into the building.
That's right.
That was a good slip there because I need to be more humble.
We do need to be more humble. Yeah, we don't want our skin drying out.
So part of what like organized us talking about this was the book on Christian and then other things that have been said about Christians. And I do feel like that maybe this was even more of a stronger sentiment back when we were kids, back when we were in high school, because that was kind of, I think there was this massive, like coming out of Reagan into Clinton as president, this massive culture shift.
Yes.
The internet. And I think Christians were like perceived to be like very slow to come to accept some of those things.
Yeah. And it was also the age of,
Aquarius.
This is the dawning of the age.
Okay, you had a good point.
There you go. It was also the age of for everything there existed in culture, there was there was the Christian version of it, and it was seen as this is how we're going to
juicy
shelter.
fruit, Jesus fruit. T-shirt.
Yes, or like the Reese's shirt. It was like Jesus, King of Kings,
Yes.
But then like even in
Coca-Cola,
yeah,
Jesus, the real thing.
I mean, we had charts
Left Behind.
Yes. Oh wow, that's one we could get into. But like,
we're gonna leave that.
We
behind.
had these. We're gonna leave that behind. But we had these charts, like in student ministry, we had these charts. It was like, if you like this band, here's who you should listen to.
No, you didn't.
Yeah, because that was like
I didn't grow up in church, so
there was a thing. It was like, if you like so and so, this band, I can't think of any right now, but because
if you like Dr. Dre, there's one popular Black Christian artist, so you should like him.
But it was a chart. Like they like produce these, and you can like hang them up in your student room and give them out. And it was also the
after
age of that.
you burned your CDs at youth camp.
That's right. And at the bonfire, like break them all.
If you like Green Day, you'll really like Reliant K because they rhyme.
But it was this like. It was a reaction to we want to be It was instead of being countercultural, which we should be. It was like anti-cultural,
right?
And I think a lot of people now look back and realize that a lot of that was maybe well-intentioned but wrongly executed, and some of it was wrongly intentioned too. But I think the issue is now Christians who grew up in that are now parenting. And so we've got to realize our own baggage in all of this and recognize ways we were affected by that, and ways like correcting our tendency when we are correcting something about culture or a way we grew up is to overcorrect and overcompensate. And we don't want to do that. It's not that we shouldn't somehow be intentionally sheltering ourselves and sheltering our families from certain things, but we should not also say, well, that was silly. It's so silly to say, if you like this band, here's the Christian band usually. Yeah. So anything my kids want to listen to or watch, I'm going to be okay with that. That's an overreaction. And
I think a nuance to this too is that, unfortunately, anytime there's people buying something, people will sell it.
Yeah.
And so I think that there were definitely people who saw, hey, there's this opportunity to capitalize on the fact that culture has changed. Christianity hasn't embraced culture. How can we kind of create our own subculture, and sell books to them and sell CDs to them and sell T-shirts to them. And I think that that certainly is a nuance. And I think this whole thing is nuanced. I do think that, and I want to be careful, deliberate in what I say about some of these things, because I do realize that, there may be a soundbite. And I mean more than that. And so I'll just go ahead and say now, if either one of us, it's probably going to be me more than him, say something that you don't like, please reach out to me for clarification. Or a friendly debate. So,
well, I think too, it's helpful to frame this in terms of an illustration you used a few weeks ago on Sunday morning about and you use the pyramid, and the top of the pyramid was doctrines, and these are the non-negotiables. So we're not talking about whether or not we're sheltering from the right doctrine, but then underneath that there's convictions which are informed by Scripture,
right.
And there is room for people to have different convictions about specific issues that maybe the Bible isn't super clear. Now I would say clear on, but does it say this is the way?
The application of the doctrine might look different in different context, even if that's two houses.
And then, and then the bottom of that pyramid being preferences. And that's where this is just, I like this more than that, and this is my preference. And being careful, I think this is within Christianity, this is where we talked about being judgmental. This is where Christians are really judgmental towards each other a lot, because we view things as preference, as that should be their conviction, and we start to judge people for their choices, for how they how they parent, how they lead their family, lead themselves, and really how they settle themselves on some of the issues of sheltering that we're talking about right now.
Yeah. So let's kind of redirect this. We kind of went off on a little sidebar there, but
really? No.
Nah, never. I think some of the ways that Christians have been perceived as being too sheltered or countercultural or separationist, if you want to use that, are in the area of schooling. And that, we create Christian schools, and we create, and I'm speaking about this neutrally right now. We homeschool those kind of things. And while there are certainly, non-Christians who create private institutions and homeschool, by and large, at least in America, I think that the majority of those are professing believers. Then also when it comes to science, at least when I was a kid, and again, not growing up in church and just kind of coming to faith in ninth grade, one of the things I was wrestling with is like, I'm learning all these things about science, and yet Christians seem to kind of be on the opposite side of that. Like there's creationism versus evolutionism, and you could fill in the blank about several different things.
Issues. Yep.
I think also you hit on this exposure to culture.
Yeah. Media, what we're watching, what we will watch, won't watch, will listen to, won't listen to. There have to be decisions made, but I think in the era that I grew up in, like it was like, how many times like will you hear people our age be like, "Oh, I've never seen that movie," and you're like, "Why?" Well, my parents wouldn't let us watch that, or that cartoon, and like for like I grew up, it was like whatever reason, like we couldn't watch the Smurfs, and I think it was because like there was
sorcery.
Like there was sorcery
right?
involved. Just like
the guy, the other dude, the big dude,
and He-Man, because it's like by the power of Grayskull, and we would sneak and watch it. Sorry, Mom and Dad, but it was seen as like that's evil. And so rather than talking through those things, like that was my parents' conviction. And so that's how they raised us. And I do not look back and think I'm so deprived because we couldn't watch the Smurfs.
So we didn't grow up in church. My mom listens to some of this sometimes, and they were just like, Bart Simpson's a great role model, James. Like,
but we had to sneak to watch the Simpsons too.
I tell people often that I felt like when I started going to church, we were there's an episode where Bart Simpson is trying to be a Flanders kid, and you probably have no idea what I'm talking about right now. Okay.
I know,
and it's like, he can't be a Flanders. That's not in his nature. And that's like how I felt going to church, So like, but yeah, He-Man. I mean, I had all of it. The He-Man stuff. Smurfs, I thought was stupid. So, because I don't like the color blue.
I probably wouldn't have been interested. Wouldn't have been interested, except it was like, you can't watch that.
But I do think you said prudish, like, Christians being offended by the culture, not just
saying that's not wise, but like offended that somebody would do this,
and but like we boycotted Disney, right? What else did we boycott as Christians?
I think the better question is, what didn't Christians boycott at some point in the 1980s?
We started cancel culture.
Often,
we're critical of cancel culture, but we started it.
That's so true. And I think, bottom line is we start talking, as we talk about some of these issues, and you hit, talking about schooling. So going back to the pyramid of doctrine and preferences and convictions. So can someone have a strong conviction about schooling? Absolutely. And we get asked a lot of times, like, why we made the choices we've made for our kids in regards to schooling. And I know you guys have, and you guys have done everything.
That's because I like to make fun of everybody. So I'm like, I can make fun of homeschoolers. I can make fun of private schoolers. I can make fun.
You make fun of public schools because I've done it all. Just trying to identify.
There may be a little bit of truth to that, actually.
I think maybe you said this already, but where we talked about before we started recording, but And all of these things, it is crucial that we examine our motives.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if a family is deciding to homeschool, if a family, I would 100% affirm and support that choice for someone.
Yeah.
If someone was deciding Christian school, absolutely. If you're deciding public school, yeah. I think we have to get into why we're doing this. And I really do think this is something that families shouldn't assume the one is the right choice all the time as a blanket for their family or for another family, because there may be times when the Holy Spirit, in His wisdom, convicts us that it's a time and different season for different opportunity. And there's 1,000. We can't. This one issue, we can't talk about every possible scenario of why someone would choose this, but that gets back to motive. And I think if your motive for homeschooling or motive for Christian school is the world is evil, and I'm going to protect my child from that. That's noble, but I also think it's impossible to protect them from everything. Now, if it comes more from an aspect of because we have many friends who homeschool, I want to invest this child and make sure they're grounded so that I can launch them well. Yeah, absolutely. But I think it comes back to motive, and what's the motive? And the same is for Christian school. And then the same is for public school. Are you just sending your kid to public school because, that's just what you do? That's the easiest choice. Well, we have kids in public school and have seen that as an opportunity to engage culture. Yeah. We have another child who's not in public school, who's in a private school, and because it was the best choice for him. And so we've got, just like you guys, we have in our own family have different, because we're looking at the needs, and that's how we have chosen to approach it.
Right.
And I know different families have different rationales. It comes back to motive.
Yeah. And I have a lot of thoughts on this. I mean, I think so. I think one thing I would say is if you're trying to make a decision about what to do with your child, that you need to, in the counsel of multitude, there's safety. So I definitely think there needs to be multiple people you ask, hey, why did you make this decision? And we always need to be wary of someone who makes a convictional thing. So let's say it's a convictional thing, a doctrinal thing. And so, because it's not a doctrinal thing. It's not in the Bible, homeschool or private school. Now, it is doctrinal that we are to be responsible for this. And we take responsibility for the preparation of our kids. So, but how that's expressed is a convictional thing. So if they start to make it a doctrinal thing, just realize, hey, they're a little imbalanced here. But ultimately, how we've approached it is our job is to prepare our children to be in the world, not of the world. So, because Jesus prayed that for us. He wants us to be in the world and not of the world. So we do not homeschool because we don't want our kids in the world ever. And if our homeschooling is just separating from the world and we're not preparing our children to ultimately engage the world, our homeschooling is missing the heart of Jesus. Right. So again, I'm not saying the homeschooling is wrong, and we did that for several years, and we may do that again. Who knows? But it's not so that they would be separate from the world, because that's not the call of the believer. The call of the believer is to engage the world. So it's how do I equip them so that when they can be in the world and not of the world when they're adults. Now, I will say that they're not necessarily called to be in the world and not of the world right now in the same way that we are as adults. And so I do think sometimes I have seen specifically pastors say, well, my children are in public school. You didn't say this. My children are in public school because it is an opportunity for us to engage the lost. And I'm like, it is indeed that, but that cannot be the motivator for sending your kids to schools, because they're not a tool.
They're not our tool
to grow your church. You know what I mean, or whatever it might be. Which you didn't say that. You said you leverage that. I think, and that's a difference. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Because essentially, as we felt very strongly, as we prayed about, and we have as a family prayed about this specific decision, and this whole podcast isn't about homeschooling, just FYI. But this is a great example of it. We prayed about it and considered it, and ultimately we felt like God was leading our family, that this was a great opportunity for our kids. We really try to talk to them about what's going on in the world and what's going on in life and what they're experiencing, and we also made it a point that we were involved in the schools, and so we were there a lot, especially in their elementary schools. Like we were volunteering. We were both mentoring.
You're just
kids.
not as involved now because you go to Blue Water. And every parent wants to do everything.
Exactly. There was where we lived before. There was a greater need.
Right.
But we got to know the administrators, and we got to know the teachers, and so we. Of course, there were things that our kids were exposed to that you don't want them exposed to, but at the same time, there are opportunities to talk through those things. So, is there a perfect solution? No, but we know that that was the right decision for our family.
And we're a servant to our children, and I said that how it gets out balanced, but I've seen this quote go around on social media, and it's like it's like, maybe the reason God has called you to homeschool your children is because of the work he wants to do in you. And I'm like, I get where that's coming from, but that is a selfish reason to make a decision for your children because what he wants to do in you. I'm like, nah, it's very clear. Like your goal as a parent is to lead, is to shepherd, is to serve these children so that they go and leave and cleave and do the thing God called them to do. And I just think that's like, sometimes we just view this as like, how does this fit into my journey? And I think when we're starting there versus just what is the best thing for these children to be the eventual adults that God has called them to be. Mm-hmm. Because again, they're only in our care for a little while. Right. They're God's. So I think we just need to be so careful that we don't carry anything that is us, centric. Mm-hmm. Into that. And so kind of shifting out of homeschool because I'm tired of talking about that.
And for the record, just so if you heard us say that one choice is bad or good, that is not what we said. We're saying motive, wisdom, seek the Lord, and don't let the sole reason be like, I'm just gonna pull my kids out or push them into
or I don't want to be around them ever.
Or push them out. Pull them in to shelter them and protect them and isolate them, or just push them out because I don't want to deal with this.
Anyway, So I think like the same kind of mentality when it comes to like what we're exposed to and all those things is there. Like, are we trying to escape or are we trying to protect?
Right.
I think that is really the question. Now I would say there's probably a lot of stuff that just we don't need to fill our time with, but like, don't think just because I filled that with something with a Christian label that I'm actually listening to the Lord. Don't think just because I'm busying myself up with church activity that I'm actually listening to the Lord. Like, God has a call on your life to be an ambassador for his sake for this kingdom. So everything you're doing is strengthening you, preparing you for who you're going to be for eternity, but also how God wants to use you for eternal purposes right now. And I just think we're not even thinking about that a lot when we make these kind of decisions.
Yeah, because I think a lot of it is just I don't want to see that. I want like the isolation and protection. And so like there is this line, we are called to guard our minds, like scripture, Paul says, don't be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. What we don't want is to slip into it, like this naivete of like what actually is going on in the world and how to engage. Talking about parenting, like it's, we need to equip our kids for how to handle situations and world issues that are going on, which means we need to be informed and we have to be intentional in those conversations. We're not just throwing them out there. We've got to have those conversations and teach them. But then not just, I think we've talked about parenting a lot, but it also goes for our own selves. Like I think some people want to shelter themselves because let's face it, like, you read the news, like the world's it's hard, it's depressing, it's broken, it's messed up, and so it's just easier.
Good point on Boggy Talk.
Oh, thanks, man.
Total.
Yeah, I'm all Boggy Talks. But it's like it's easier to ignore it. It's easier to turn it off. And there are times I do think it is healthy to turn it off.
Right. Turn off the noise.
Because we do get, but like we cannot ignore the world we live in. And you have to be informed. You have to be like, we should be, as Christians, we should be reading the news from multiple news sources, not just the one that affirms our political leanings. So we're talking about that next week. But like we should be reading, we should be like I talk about like praying the news. Like you should be reading and seeing these issues that are going on and praying through these things. Like Lord, but we can't isolate and pull, and we can't operate in this naivety of like naivete. I forget. Maybe if I had a better education, I would know the right way to say that.
Sheltered.
So sheltered, but.
Your mom's like a public school principal.
She was a elementary school principal
for
sheltered, so I was not
Metro Atlanta.
Yeah,
suburban Atlanta.
That's right. So I think culturally we want to shelter ourselves too. And I was thinking in terms of sheltering, like I think even in our own area, in our community of Niceville, this is a great place to live. I mean, everyone who lives here, it loves it. But I think the reason sometimes people love living here is because it feels a little sheltered from. It does. We're from some of the, it's not as diverse. There's not as many. There are issues in our community, of course, but there's not as many. They're not as pronounced. They're a little more hidden. We aren't dealing with some of the same issues that bigger cities are dealing with, and crime. But the point of saying that is a lot of those motivations actually have nothing to do with protecting ourselves or sheltering ourselves from sin or sinful things or guarding our minds. You can desire to be sheltered and have it have nothing to do with the Lord.
Yeah, well, we talked about Orphan Sunday being this past Sunday, and anytime I say this, people are like, oh, you're saying everyone has to. And I said this Sunday, I'm not saying everyone has to. I'm saying a lot should. I mean, and I think that we want, like, people are like, well, how do you deal with the heartache of foster care, kids coming in and out of your house? And I'm like, it is heartbreaking, but the greater heartbreak is if I do nothing, and I think that we protect our kids from heartache in this world, by not engaging with the world. And again, there's a differentiation between watching The Simpsons and being around people who act like The Simpsons. You know what I mean? Because, watching The Simpsons, why? Like, what's the point? You know what I mean? But being around people who watch The Simpsons and who like, which is still on, that's crazy. That's still a relevant illustration. But anyway, like, so I'm a big opponent of church league sports. Opponent. Yeah. Now, I will say this, Crosspoint in our town does basketball because no one provides it in our community. So I'm a proponent of that, and I actually support them and help coach. So I want to make that very clear. But when there's a city league, if we're in the world, not of the world, we need to be out coaching and out being parents and being salt and light in that. And I have to remind myself of that because I get a little competitive sometimes. But like, we need to be out there. And why are we? And I'll be honest with you, I think most of the reason why is because we want our kids to play more, not because we want to avoid the world.
Yes.
And I think that has a lot to do with what has happened in the subculture, because it's like we can affirm ourselves and pride ourselves in being a part of the bigger fish in the smaller pond of the Christian subculture.
Yeah.
And that's just not what Jesus has called us to do.
Right. I think as we talk through a lot of these issues, there's so much liberty in
where the Spirit of the Lord is.
There's freedoms, right? Like in the preference and convictions. And I think where a lot of the tension is that we tend to elevate our convictions to doctrine, or we don't know how to think about something, or we don't know what we think. And so we look at other people who we respect, who do make good choices, and we see their convictions, and we just elevate that to doctrine as well.
Yeah.
And
questions are not scary. Questions are not scary too. Like, if Jesus is the truth, if the Word of God is the truth, why are we so scared of questions like about evolution? Like, hey, let's look at what the Bible says about that.
It's kind of like we want our kids so much to believe that we can be overly scared when they have doubts. And we were having a conversation with one of our kids who's a believer. He was just like, I just don't understand this. I'm having some doubts. Like, first you need to know it is okay to question this, because your questions are only, and so as you're questioning through decisions, like they should only, like our questioning
have
things,
mercy on those who doubt. Jude 22.
And like those questions should only will ultimately lead to stronger conviction and preference if we're seeking the Lord. And and I think that's the bottom line in all of this, is that so much gets left out of, like, it's okay to wrestle through this and some of these issues to come to different conclusions as other people. And I think we also, as adults, because have to think through, how am I guarding my mind?
Yeah, right.
How am I sheltering? And I'll give this illustration. So there's a show that a lot of people are watching called Ted Lasso on Apple TV, and it's hilarious.
I've seen one episode.
And so I watched several of the episodes because several people that I like, they are great people, sound people, were tweeting about it, how funny it was. And I was like, well, I want to check this out. And we had a free, I wouldn't pay for it. We had a free subscription because of
why doesn't drink pumpkin spice?
That's right. And so I watched it, and it was hilarious. It was so funny.
Like
so
on a level of like,
it was just kind of like
if I'm me up here and how funny I am, where is it?
I mean, you're like off the chart. 11. It was a definite solid 5.
Okay, I got it.
But it was just funny. It was dry. But one thing about it is they kept saying the F word over and over and over. And I am like, that is not necessarily a temptation for me to like just go start
dropping F-bombs.
But here's what I found. Is that after watching a few episodes, I found myself thinking that. And I'm being transparent here, so I was like, that's a major red flag. And I wasn't binge watching it, so it wasn't even that I was like watching, it was like an episode a week. And I was like, you know what? I got to stop. Like, that is not healthy. And it was
He's talking about fear, the word fear.
Yeah.
Because that's not in our vocabulary as Christians. No fear.
But then go to context. Like, so before ministry, like I taught for a year in public school. And if you think like, and some of our public school teachers, especially in the secondary level, could agree with this. Like, if you think like the things that your kids are exposed to, like there's some crazy stuff that happens with teachers at that level. And specifically the stage of life I was in, the teachers that I was teaching with, and the language that was around. But it totally did not affect me. I did not find that rubbing off on me at all. But for whatever reason, this show was like, make him, and I was like, I gotta cut it off.
Jason Sudeikis is so charming.
He is so charming.
Yeah. I think that, back to what you referenced, doctrines, convictions, preferences. And I think it really comes down to, so like people have different preferences on worship style. And there's not a right or wrong.
People have preferences. I'm completely unaware of these preferences.
I shield you from some of those things.
Do.
But, there is a right for a group of people, and I think, when it comes to our family, when it comes to us personally, there might not be a right or wrong about some of these things, but there is a right for us. Yeah. And we have the right to voice our concern to other people about their choices. And if we're in their life, that gives us opportunity to do that. Something that just when we talk about all this stuff, because I do think one of the reasons we're viewed as too sheltered is because we hold to a standard that God has. We believe certain things that have progressed in our culture are not helpful for our culture or for people. But Paul, when he's walking in Athens, he sees a city full of idols. I mean, he sees a pagan culture, and it says that his spirit was provoked within him.
Yeah.
And I think that as a Christian, I want to be provoked by the culture and not offended by the culture.
That's good.
So that's what I want my children to be too. Like when I see the fact that people view sexuality and marriage different than me, when I see the fact that people don't respect each other by the way, the language they use and the sexual humor they use and the profanity they use, when I see that people engage in listening and watching and all that, like I want to be provoked to help them see how Jesus is better, not a subculture is better. Right. And I'm not offended. I'm not offended because look, that we talk about this, being exposed to that doesn't cause me to sin. My sin comes from within my heart. And I think when we're looking at the plank in our own eye, because it's closer, we're able to see clearly to take the speck out of brother's eye. Again, engage and see clearly. And so, I just think it kind of does fit into what we've been talking about, is that we've got to be following Jesus. And we got to be trying to, with counsel, making the best decisions based on our doctrine and convictions, and then engage people at the convictional level, definitely at the doctrinal level. And I just think it's going to be a tension we wrestle with, and we live in a hyper-sexualized, hyper-sensualized, hyper-gratified culture.
Yep.
And we're going to be exposed to this. Our children are going to be exposed to this. And how do we do our best to keep their eyes on the right thing and to correct? Correct.
To correct. And I think specifically, you talked about parenting, and my kids, and I'm sure your kids, and if you have kids, they've accused you of this probably, they get mad and they're like, you're just trying to shelter us because of something I won't let them watch. I'm like, you know what? You are absolutely right, because of your age and where you are, like, you're not ready for this. And, and helping them understand, and that's okay. And so I would just say in that, you alluded to it, like, there are things and preferences or convictions that are right for this group, and as a family unit, and then also for yourself, like, you've got to know, like, what are your hangups, what are your triggers, what are your temptations, and you should guard against those. And it's wise to do that. And that might look different for how you flesh that out in your own life, in your own family, than someone else. And we've learned a lot from other people. Like, hey, we don't parent the same way in this regards, but you got a valid point there, and it may be something I need to think about. And I think that's where we just have to be incredibly humble and just be like, you know what, we're all figuring this out too.
Yeah. Two parting things I would say. That one is, even with we both have larger families, it's not one size fits all in our family. So it's certainly not for every family. And then secondly is a statement I say as a leader, but also in our home, is until further notice, which means, like, we had to make a decision about this thing. It doesn't mean this is forever, but this is until further notice. This is what we're going to do, because I want to always be open and humble to what the Lord might do. And man, this is an area of liberty. Like, I just want to encourage you that if your desire is to honor God, and to specifically, because it's pressure is more with children, and to help them honor God, and you choose homeschool or private school or public school, but that's your intention, God honors that, and He helps you in that. And there's just so much grace. And so let's be gracious to one another about the choices that we make.
There's a lot of freedom. Now, for our freedom doesn't give us liberty to sin and to not care.
Serve one another.
But we want to engage the world, be in the world, not of the world. And that's why.
So you can drink pumpkin spice from Starbucks, even though Justin thinks you're a sellout.
I might slightly judge you. But
I don't.
But, I was just thinking, everyone's going to come to
my
different
wife
conclusions.
Me for spending that much money, but
right. But here's the end of the day. This is why the church is the body of Christ, and it's beautiful, actually, when you think about different people landing in different places about this, and how we all strengthen and encourage and serve each other.
All a part of the body.
So
some of you are the appendix.
That's right.
We're worried about why you even are there, and that you're going to rupture and blow us all up. But you're all part of the body.
Well, on that note, we're going to wrap it up. Hey, next week we're continuing in this series, Problems with Christians, and we're going to be talking about Christians being seen as too political. And that's just pretty cut and dry and easy. That'll be pretty short, right? I'm sure.
Quick.
So that's it. Hey, thanks.
Don't be.
Don't be. Stop.
Okay.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Boggy Talk. We are so glad you joined in the conversation. Go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss a beat.